The utilities, they have a very big challenge. They have to manage a very complex grid that is changing very rapidly. And typically utilities like to move at glacier pace. There are some utilities out there that are starting to recognize the shift. But a lot of utilities, frankly, are going to have to rethink their processes because they're going to be in a situation where we're back to, the energy crisis of the late 70s and early 80s, where there's brownouts and blackouts because they just haven't kept up and they haven't modernized the grid and they haven't recognized that, demand is outpacing the supply, and gatekeeping distributed energy is just a losing value proposition.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Renewable Rides. Today we are honored to be accompanied by Ryan Knudson, who has 15 years experience, trained as an electrical engineer, and has gone from the army to building automation to prop tech, and is now the Vice President of Energy and Sustainability at Phillips Edison. And Ryan, welcome. We like to get to know our guests first, so can you share what are you passionate about?
Oh, thanks, Gareth. What am I passionate about? I'm passionate about leveraging the power of business to make positive changes to the world. It started with the military. When I joined, I wanted to do something bigger than myself, and I've carried that into how I conduct business in my current role.
Love it. And similarly, I think about how let's leverage capitalism and the way the world works, the business world works to impact change. You've had a very interesting career from, as you said, the Army to NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory to Macerich and now Phillips Edison and Company. What do you think is the through line in that whole career trajectory?
Yeah, great question. I think the through line is every organization that I was a part of was a service-first organization, where they were either servicing, the country, servicing, their tenants, our neighbors, our communities, but it was a service industry in different ways. And leveraging that mantra of customer service and servicing communities really ties closely into what I do day in, day out at Phillips Edison with energy and sustainability, providing, clean, renewable energy to our tenants where they want it, but also hardening our shopping centers against market forces and headwinds as we see utility rates continue to increase.
You use the term community there, and I know in many of our conversations that's something that's really important to you. Can you share a little bit more with our listeners about when Phillips Edison is thinking about it and you're really driving this, the community side of things?
Yeah, so Phillips Edison, if you look at our organization, the first thing that you'll see is grocery store anchor, community focused. We are the heart of many of our communities, right? Everyone goes to their grocery store, right? Everyone goes to the dry cleaner, right? And so we're very cognizant and strategic about that community hub approach and perspective with our shopping centers, not just in terms of like tenant lineup and what's going to be successful, but what is going to be the long-term net benefit of the community that we operate in, because ultimately that's what's going to make the shopping center successful.
So Ryan, from that perspective then, can you describe why Phillips Edison would have a VP of Energy and Sustainability, and what are you responsible for?
Yeah, happy to do that. So I've been with Phillips Edison for about 2 years. They asked me to help them build out the energy and sustainability program because they recognized that while they were doing a lot of great things, it was disjointed. And there wasn't a lot of strategy or forward thinking and connective tissue between all the great things that they were doing. So Phillips Edison asked me to kind of step in and help organize all of the great things that property management was doing. So my day in and day out is really, again, customer service. My number one customer is property management. So I help them manage their utility expenses, both in terms of looking at individual bills and negotiating rates with utilities, negotiating rates with providers where we're in deregulated markets, and then aggregating all of the capital and operational efforts that property management is doing so that I can elevate that to the decision makers and unlock capital that will be strategically placed into the properties that will benefit both the shopping center, the tenants, and the communities in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, Ryan, we hosted a panel the other day, and it was super well attended, and then talking about turning rooftops to revenue. And the number of people that came to us yesterday at our booth saying, awesome panel, we didn't know this was possible, amazing to see Ryan and the team actually deploying these solutions. You know, you're in a really unique vantage point being at Pico and driving this change and opportunity. What do you think people are missing in the industry from a perspective of energy and sustainability and how that can be linked back into their business?
Hey, great to hear that people, got something out of that panel. It's always difficult to know if did anyone actually learn anything or were we just up there for funsies? But I think the gap that a lot of organizations have when it comes to energy, when it comes to utilities, is a lot of organizations, especially in commercial real estate, just view that as the cost of doing business, and they don't recognize the headwinds that are current and coming until, they get the bill 2 years from now and they're like, why did my operating costs increase by 23%? Oh, because utility rates have increased by 23%. So I think a lot of the gap there is A, knowledge gap, but also B, a gap in focus. And so a lot of the larger organizations and larger REITs, they obviously have somebody sitting in my seat, but the smaller companies that have maybe 5 million square feet, 15 million square feet, right? And it's owner operator. They're so busy just doing their business that they don't necessarily have time to dig into the utility bills like my team does, because they're not big enough. And it's not until they get their utility bills, at the end of the month, or they do a reconciliation at the end of the year, that they're like, oh no, what happened? And then at that point, it's too late, right? You've already spent those dollars, it's already out the door, and now you're behind the power curve. No pun intended there. So, I think that the gap there is paying attention to utility rates, because over the last 5-6 years, utility rates have exploded in double-digit increases, which is wild to me. Again, having done this for 15 years, prior to 2019, 2020, you could easily model rate growth at 2.5%, 3.5%, and that was that was manageable. But when you see in certain markets rate increases of 15%, 18%, and those continue to happen, quarter on quarter, year on year, and they're not going to slow down. It's getting proactive, deploying technologies and leveraging opportunities to harden against those costs. Because ultimately, as a real estate owner, you can push that off to CAM, you can do a couple of other things, but what I'm cognizant of is the total cost of occupancy of our tenants. If it becomes too expensive for them just to run their business, they're either A, going to erode into our rents, or they're going to move on to something else. And that is what I think about often. And that's what I talk to my executive team and my board about when I talk about renewable energy, is not necessarily the altruistic angle of renewable energy. It is more about how we make our shopping centers, how we position our shopping centers in such a way that we are palatable for tenants for the long term.
You nailed it. And in our own backyard, on the rising rates in California, it's been over 72% in the last since 2021, right? And so,
And it's not just the rising, is it? It's the volatility and unpredictability that's almost worse for business leaders. Because
I mean, yeah, I talk to a lot of energy brokers, right? And I, obviously pay very close attention to energy markets. And almost every year during the reconciliation period, my brokers and my partners are like, well, next year's going to be better. And it's not. Every year I'm like, okay, I'm waiting for that better time. And I've kind of come to the realization that with the rise of AI, which is not going away, the demand for compute power and the second order effect of the demand for power is going to increase. And so those markets today that aren't constrained with energy and that solar doesn't necessarily pencil out, that's exactly the same market that these data center developers are looking at, because it's cheap, because it's easy, and they can throw up 4 walls and a roof very quickly and start slamming in compute power. So I see in the next 3 to 5 years, markets that are currently not palatable for solar will become very palatable for solar. Not necessarily, again, from an altruistic perspective, but from the fact that it is easy to deploy, or not easy, but quicker to deploy solar as a energy source than it is to build a traditional fuel source power plant.
absolutely. And 4 or 5 years ago, energy was not a discussion in the boardroom, and now it is. I'm curious how that conversation has shifted within Phillips Edison and all the way up to your C-suite.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I did a presentation last year to my board about the energy markets, and I did some extrapolation out over the next 3 to 5 years, really kind of letting the board know this is why we're going to invest in solar. This is why we're really focused on that. And one of my board members looked at the analysis and was like, "That's the clearest way I've looked at the energy market. But Ryan, I think you're a little conservative here. I think the rates are going to be much higher." And I was like, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So that means we can go faster. And they're like, yeah, we should be going much faster. And my CEO used that as a jump point to say like, hey, listen, again, we're doing sustainability, not necessarily from an altruistic or purely altruistic perspective, but we're doing it because it makes business sense, because we see the headwinds that are coming in 3 to 5 years, and we can deploy capital in a way that hardens us from those headwinds that will eventually hit all of real estate. And when those headwinds hit and those tenants are looking for an off-ramp to still do their business, but in a more profitable way, we're going to be ready to deliver that product.
So we're sitting here in Vegas at ICSC, and all the largest retail asset owners in the world are here. There's this split incentive problem in commercial real estate where asset owners own the properties, yet the tenants are the ones that are typically paying the electricity bills. How do you think about that? How are you addressing that? And how should other asset owners be looking at the changing energy dynamic and this split incentive problem?
So I call that the triangle of death. And the triangle of death is where a lot of renewable energy projects go to die. And that triangle of death is 3 organizations: a developer, a tenant, and a landlord, all pushing against each other to maximize the value proposition of a project. And the landlord wants to command top line revenue from a lease. The developer has a profit margin that they have to hit to build the thing, and the tenant wants to offset as much of their utility cost as possible, and everyone's pushing for the same dollar. And that's where a lot of times these projects fail to realize, because somebody says, no, that's not, enough for me. So the way that I think about that is, relationship based, and how do we streamline things for the tenants and for ourselves, and frankly for the developers, so that everyone feels like they are getting the maximum potential value of a project. So I look at that, and I think that the streamlining effect is for landlords to get inside of that value chain and to start to provide energy as a service. And that's something that we've been talking about in terms of how do we provide cheap and stable power to our tenants over the life of their lease.
The fourth leg in that stool would be the utility, and they are the ones that are, eroding a lot of that profitability for your tenants.
Yeah, well, I didn't include them because I don't call them the fourth leg. I call them the gatekeeper. And yeah, so, listen, the utilities, they have a very big challenge. They have to manage a very complex grid that is changing very rapidly. And typically utilities like to move at glacier pace. So, there are some utilities out there that are starting to recognize the shift. But a lot of utilities, frankly, are going to have to rethink their processes, because they're going to be in a situation where we're back to, the energy crisis of the late 70s and early 80s, where there's brownouts and blackouts because they just haven't kept up, and they haven't modernized the grid, and they haven't recognized that, demand is outpacing the supply, and gatekeeping distributed energy is just a losing value proposition.
It's such a great opportunity for them, isn't it? Is having companies like yourselves actually financing, creating capacity on the grid.
I would think, but some of the utilities definitely don't share that perspective. So, but it is changing, right? Like I've seen, markets, if we had this conversation 10 years ago, the only markets I would talk about is California, New York, right, New Jersey, maybe Colorado-ish. But like very few markets. But now we've seen markets, open up in Illinois. We've seen markets open up in Oregon. We've seen markets open up in other states. And I think that will continue to happen, again, with the rise of the demand for compute power, right? I really am focused on the fact that data center developer is really efficient at throwing up 4 walls and a roof, and their development cycle is, say 18 to 24 months, whereas a utility building a traditional fuel source power plant is 5 to 7 years. Yeah. I'm not an economic major, but I've studied supply and demand, and there seems to be a gap there. So I think that will drive a lot of investment in distributed energy, because again, deploying renewable energy or solar, removing the altruistic part of that, deploying solar energy is just faster and cheaper.
Yeah. Ryan, I really enjoyed your description the other day on the panel about how you've got this multi-pronged opportunity, and each commercial option comes with a different risk profile. But every site is unique. Every site is different. It's got its own utility tariffs, its own energy consumption, its own tenants. Can you describe kind of the core revenue potential opportunities and risk profiles?
The value lanes, right? So a lot of commercial real estate organizations, right? This is new for them, so they pick what I would call like a swim lane on how they're going to recognize value from distributed energy, and then they just stick with that, and that's fine. But I look at the 4 potential value propositions of a roof lease, a PPA, utility arbitrage and a full aggregated distributed energy network, microgrid, if you will, situation, right? Those are the kind of the 4 swim lanes. With each of those swim lanes, there's a linear relationship between the complexity of the technology, the complexity of the relationships with the developer, and the value proposition to the organization. And so a lot of companies, they pick one that they're comfortable with and they just stick there. My approach has been, I want to play in all 4 swim lanes, but I want to deploy distributed energy in a specific value proposition where it makes sense for that specific market. So for instance, in a high tariff market, I may want to provide that I may want to own that asset and provide renewable energy to the tenants as a mechanism for insulating them against the rise in utility costs. Where that may not make sense is other markets where, the demand isn't as high for, offsetting utility costs, but, legislation has favorable, like community solar, right? Or legislation is, hey, you can't buy it directly, you have to buy it from a community solar, organization, right? So in that case, I just want to deploy a roof lease, right? So, being flexible and recognizing that there is a linear relationship between complexity and value, I think is key. And the advice that I would give to other organizations is be thoughtful about that. It is obviously easy to pick a swim lane and just stick with that and be like, hey, we're creating value, we're happy with it, and that's great, that's lovely. But if you introduce a little bit of complexity, you can unlock untapped revenue or value opportunities.
Absolutely. And you're an energy professional. You spent your entire career.
Let's use professional like loosely.
But you've spent your entire career thinking about energy. Yet you're in a real estate organization, and your peers or your colleagues within the organization are real estate professionals. They're used to building community centers and community hubs that are incredible beacons within the community. What do you think the unlock has been, whether it's with your property management team, whether it's with your C-suite, whether it's with asset management, to get them to start to see the opportunity and get behind it? Because you're not able to do this on your own. This is an organizational decision. So you need to enroll these other stakeholders and get them on board with this approach. What do you think that unlock has been to get them on board?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's shifted. 10 years ago, it was a much harder conversation. I would say, again, with the rise of utility costs, with so much conversation around data centers and AI and the strain on the utility grid, the conversation is much easier. It used to be, kind of pulling the organization in a direction. Now I'm getting pushed, right? When my asset management or portfolio management group come to me and they're like, hey, can we deploy solar here? Because we're modeling the cost of operations and it's not favorable. I'm like, we can. Let's see what we can do. The issue is that first cost, right? With the ITC sunsetting, it's going to lock out some markets for a period of time, which is unfortunate, but it also allows, I think, it creates an opportunity for people to focus on those really constrained markets and deploy some really smart capital. But the conversation, honestly, over the last couple of years has been much easier because people see the cost of energy in their home. They see the cost of energy in their pro formas. They see the cost of energy everywhere, in the news, everywhere. And that has been very helpful at the, asset manager level, all the way through my C-suite and the board, because everyone has the same problem statement. It costs more to do the same thing. And again, removing the altruistic angle of renewable energy, it's just easier to deploy solar onto a roof than it is to build a power plant.
And Ryan, just building on that, we were proud to both our teams got innovation awards the other day from ICSC. Can you just describe a little bit about the culture within Pico and how you're able to drive this innovation throughout the organization?
Yeah, that's a great point. Pico is really unique, and it starts with our CEO, Jeff Edison. He is very focused on emerging trends. He's very focused on the rise of AI and how that can be leveraged to improve business operations, but in a thoughtful way. And so the culture of innovation inside of Pico really starts with Jeff and has been distributed across all of the associates, where internally we give out innovation awards every year to our associates. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a technological innovation. It can be a process innovation. And that spirit of entrepreneurship, that spirit of innovation permeates throughout the entire organization. So I feel very fortunate to have been able to jump into Phillips Edison, because when I bring new ideas, novel approaches to existing processes, there's not a lot of institutional pushback or institutional malaise, right? If it's a good idea and it solves a problem or it improves a process, everyone across the organization is like, yeah, let's try it out. Let's do it. Let's see what happens. And that's so unique, especially in real estate. In real estate, it's a lot of, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And that's just not the case, specifically at Pico, at Phillips Edison. I think that is very unique and allows me to be a little bold, a little dangerous, but always looking at the returns, always looking at the yields, always paying attention to the financial analysis, because again, it has to make sense.
So if you achieve your bold and dangerous outcomes, what does success look like in the next few years? When is Ryan absolutely stoked with his performance?
Well, I don't know if I'll ever be that. Don't get too comfortable. Don't believe your own pre-hype. But Phillips said, what I am proud of is last year we set some new environmental goals. We set a goal to host. And by host, and we're very specific about that, doesn't necessarily mean owner and operate. It doesn't necessarily mean consume renewable energy, just provide, right? Host, whether it's for the tenants, whether it's for us, whether it's for the community, we're going to host 25 megawatt of on-site energy by 2030.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I was very proud of that because when I came on 2 years ago, we had about 1 megawatt of total hosting. And I looked at the opportunity, I looked at, the portfolio and said, we got a lot of opportunity here. We just got to get focused, right? And we got to do the work. And that's, frankly, where you guys came in, because there's 100,000 developers out there. And so how do you navigate that, right? Because every developer will tell you they can scale, but they're really good at one market, even though they want to scale, right? Or other developers are at scale, but you're one small, fish in their very large pond. So it's hard to get, traction. So where I've been very thankful is that you guys have been able to come in and help navigate that marketplace and allow me to be more strategic, as opposed to having 15 different calls with 15 different vendors and getting bogged into the details. So that's what I'm focused on. I'm very proud of that goal. I think we have about 8 megawatt of projects that are currently in development. So, taking it from 1 megawatt, and then 2 years later, we have 8 in the pipeline, with another, I think, 15 megawatt under evaluation. Like, we're going to hit that goal. We're definitely going to hit that goal. We're going to exceed that goal. And that's not just, again, an altruistic goal to set. That is tying back to recognizing the environment, recognizing the headwinds that are going to come, and providing a service to our tenants and to our communities proactively before it becomes such a problem that we can't solve that problem.
Yeah, you guys have been crushing it, and it's comes from your leadership. It comes all the way up to Jeff himself and supporting this and getting on the front foot and not just reacting but driving the industry and driving these great projects into your communities.
Yeah, I again, my entire leadership team. When I talk about renewable energy, the answer is always, how can we go bigger? Like, what else are we going to do? This makes a lot of sense. We see what's coming in the next 3 years, next 3 to 5 years. Like, how can we go faster? What support do you need from us as an executive team to go in that direction? Which is just a very unique perspective.
I love you setting the target, and congrats on your progress. I think you raised a really interesting point around your time is precious. There's a lot of complexity in this. There's a lot of details. How do you elevate yourself to be able to be in, making smart decisions instead of getting stuck in that analysis paralysis, which a lot of people do?
The triangle of death. We've talked a lot about strategy and kind of big ideas, but I don't want to overlook as you point out, the complexity of every single deal, right? Working with the local utility. Sometimes you're working with the local utility on 3 different projects, but they're 20 miles away from each other, and the grid is different in that 20 miles. And so what makes sense in one part of town doesn't make sense in the other part of town. These projects are incredibly complex, and you can lose yourself in just the engineering of it. And I think a lot of times people end up getting bogged down in that complexity, get bogged down in the nuance of trying to understand why utility said yes over here, but no over there. But finding key partners that can just navigate that can present projects that aren't pie in the sky, but are realistic, deployable projects, is so important.
Couldn't have said it better. Every market's different, every property's different, and that's why you just need to get some wins. So we're running short on time. Let's shift into our power surge round. Ryan,
okay.
If you could be any energy technology, what would it be and why?
I would be HVAC fan motors. Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that.
Nobody does. So there's some new technology that came out a couple of years ago that really turned the fan energy market on its head, with different types of physical motors, right? That just generate or use power in a different way, kind of like LED for fan motors. And there's so much HVAC, and as climate change continues to impact new markets, the demand for HVAC, the energy demand on that, is going to increase. So I look at the fan motor market and the HVAC market as a critical component, much like lighting was, years ago. That's going to be the next growth opportunity to make a significant impact on the load of the grid. Again, I look at supply and demand, right? And like where we're exceeding, the supply market, and that to me is a way of softening that or slowing down that exponential demand growth.
So good. I think people completely underestimate. Everyone's talking about data centers, but the load that's going to come online from HVAC and electric cars, and it's crazy. And
you can put a lot of solar and even some batteries, but people like cold houses and warm houses, right? They like to be comfortable, and they like to be comfortable 24/7. So I look at fan motors as something that is underappreciated as a sustainable opportunity.
So Ryan, bring us home. Can you finish this sentence, please? I will have been successful when?
I'll be successful when energy and sustainability aren't a novel topic that we get to talk about on a podcast, but are just embedded in everyday business operations. That it's not a novel thing, that it is just a part of doing business like anything else.
Yeah, so good. It's been a pleasure to partner with you. Thanks for coming on the show. It's been super fun being able to do this live at ICSC. Enjoy the rest of it, and thank you again for
thank you.
all your business.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Thank you for your leadership.
Cheers. Thank you.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.